Good morning. My name is Sadie Day Pasha. I'm the author of Cohen of Georgetown County, South Carolina, 1760 through 1960, A Family History of Low Country Jews and Descendants in America. Our mother, Fannie Green, born 1927, was a daughter of Virginia Smith and Lewis Green. She often repeated she was from Cohen, Smith, and Pyatt families of Georgetown County, South Carolina, and generations of Cherokee people and Geechee people from West Africa. Her compelling, true story was an effortless embrace of these three different cultures, traditions, and religions, and is testimony of her love of family, though mother lived and practiced as a Portuguese Jew all her life. This tale begins in 1497 during the Inquisition in Portugal, and continues on to tell the story of the arrival of Moses Cohen, a Portuguese Jew and skilled merchant from London, England, who came into Charleston, South Carolina with his 10-year-old son Abraham Cohen about 1750. At first, a small group of Portuguese Jews and their families prayed at home. Later, Moses Cohen, with zeal, led the small religious group as they gathered to worship in a building made of wood in Charleston, calling themselves Kohul Kodesh Beth Elohim. Abraham Cohen, born 1739, was the first son of Moses Cohen. He moved to Georgetown, South Carolina in his 20s, a few years before his father's death, to become a planter. He owned a blacksmith shop and 21 slaves, and worked as an auctioneer, selling enslaved Geechee people and property offloaded from ships to the highest bidder. He then later served in a militia at the siege of Charleston during the American Revolutionary War of 1776. While living in his home on Prince Street in Georgetown District with our ancestor, a free person of color known as Free Peggy or Peggy McWhorter. Our mother's story was written down from recollections of family stories listened to and ritual traditions practiced at home in secret. Fannie Green, our mother, was a great-great-granddaughter of Priscilla Cohen, great-granddaughter of Grace Cohen Smith, granddaughter of Richard Smith, and daughter and only surviving child of Virginia Smith and Lewis Green. Our mother's story centers on Portuguese Jews, religious ritual traditions, and the complicated family relationship with the Geechee people from Georgetown, South Carolina, sharing the surname Cohen, including Rosa Cohen Robinson, the great-grandmother of the First Lady of the United States, Mrs. Michelle Robinson Obama. Our mother's story of her birth and family always began at the kitchen table with the same words. My grandmother Adele from Georgetown, South Carolina, came and got me as a baby. I was born in Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. My mother and my twin sister died in 1927. Mother was born in Georgetown, South Carolina, and so was my father, Lewis Green. My grandmother Adele Pyatt changed my name from Fannie Green to Edna Smith. I was raised by her and my grandfather, Richard Smith, in Georgetown, South Carolina, until the age of 17 when I came north to Freeport, New York, to live with Aunt Sadie and her husband, Uncle Grant. Our mother, Fannie Green, trained her eldest daughters, Peggy and Sadie, to light candles before dark at home, in memory of family that passed away long ago. She told all of her children to never eat at people's homes, and taught them, as she had been taught by her grandparents, good Southern home training. Fannie Green was born in Baltimore, Maryland on February 5, 1927, the surviving twin daughter of Virginia Smith and Lewis Green of Georgetown, South Carolina. She never attended any church, circumcised her two boy children, and read only the King James Version Old Testament Bible. She gave them as gifts to her grandchildren. She lit candles on weekends and only visited and had come to visit family from Georgetown, South Carolina. She stood less than 5 feet tall and was buxom for her height. Our father, Daniel Day, joined the United States Army in 1942, a year after the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. He bragged he was a radio man during the Korean War, ending his service in 1952, the year I was born, Mother said. After completing service in the U.S. Army, our father went to school under the GI Bill. He was deaf in one ear from the war and usually signaled his young children to speak louder, holding his head angled downward, placing his hand to his ear in near frustration. "You have to speak louder," Mother admonished in barely noticeable Geechee Southern dialect, as she told us again how father moved her and 3 young children, Peggy, Daniel, and Richard, from military housing in Freeport, New York, into new public housing named after James Weldon Johnson, to a 7th-floor, 3-bedroom apartment in an elevated building on the east side of Manhattan at 114th Street and Lexington Avenue, less than a mile from the East River. The East Harlem Community Health Center was on 116th Street, and Public School 57 was just across the street from our home. Daddy worked in the historic Central Park. He entered the conservatory garden through a 20-foot tall black ornamental wrought iron gate each morning at 105th and 5th Avenue. He wore a polished black work shoes and a dark green uniform jacket with a matching shirt and belt and tie and socks. On his head was a splayed octagon green-colored cap that had a patent leather shiny brim. In the center of the cap was a bronze metal nickel-sized seal engraved in fine point in a half circle that read, City of New York, Parks Department. Daddy met our mother, Fannie, walking down the street wearing a wide-brimmed hat looking like a peacock in the mid-1940s, according to her. He was a private in the United States Army for 6 years before marrying his sweetheart in the tenement apartment of Reverend Chandler, a clergyman living on Madison Avenue in East Harlem. Our father always had a separate shelf in what Dottie, our nickname for him because Peggy, Ann, our older sister, could not pronounce Daddy, Mother said. He had a separate shelf in what he called an ice box. We did not have an ice box, Mother said, repeatedly correcting him in the mid-1950s, almost shouting, pronouncing the word with emphasis. It's a refrigerator. On a separate bottom shelf of the refrigerator was his food. He cooked and ate. That included green heart bananas, several wrapped fresh crabs or lobsters, and unsliced pork bacon wrapped in brown seal closed butcher's paper. Mother insisted father separate his food from what she ate and fed to her 7 children. And it stayed that way as long as I remember, even after I married in 1970. She never talked about Christmas or decorated a tree. Fannie, our mother, kept a Hebrew calendar when we were children. It was hidden behind a regular calendar on the wall, just outside of the hole-like kitchen on a small wall that faced the living room. She also read and kept handy a farmer's almanac in a kitchen drawer that farmers use to know when to plant crops, she said. I replied, we don't live on a farm. I asked Fannie at about 6, when I was learning how to tell time, why is that calendar, the other calendar, behind the regular calendar? Sometimes she would put the other calendar, Hebrew calendar, on top of the regular calendar. When she did, I was just beginning to read and told Ma in front of my older brothers and sisters who were listening and helping me to tell time. I can't read the calendar behind the regular one. I can't recall Mother's complete answer. Something about Gregorian, she said, as my siblings stood by. But I do remember she changed the subject that day. Once a year before Passover, Mother had all of her children thoroughly clean our 3-bedroom apartment home. Passover home cleaning in our apartment was different. It was intense, went on for days and weeks, and was exhausting. It included the use of Comet cleanser, Clorox bleach, mops with handles, clean white rags, Tide detergent, and buckets of water in steel pails. The apartment walls in our home in every room and hallway were washed, top to bottom. I still remember the whooshing sound of wrung-out towel-like cleaning rags against the apartment walls as hands grasping bunched up white rags moved up and down. Each of the 4 children, including Peggy Ann, the oldest, always called Peggy, Daniel called Junior and pronounced Junior, Richard and me, because we were old enough, had specific cleaning duties before Passover each year. The slight smell of bleach was in the air of our quiet apartment home as older brothers Daniel, we pronounce his name Junior, and Richard washed walls, top to bottom, standing on kitchen chairs in the hallway outside the bedrooms as big sister Peggy washed the dining room walls. These were our children's duties for that Passover. When I complained my knees hurt me from scrubbing the floor in the hallway, Mother said, that's the way I had to do it. For my grandmother, Adele, on my knees to get it clean. Peggy, our big sister, brothers Daniel, Richard, and me finished exhausted, but did our assigned cleaning in preparation for Passover. Mother always baked lamb for Passover, though she did not like the greasy taste of leg of lamb. It was greasy, she often said, and never cooked it the rest of the year. She always purchased and used the same ingredients each Passover. Only Manischewitz Concord grape kosher wine, Sun-made kosher raisins, fresh celery, and sometimes used the walnuts or pecans brought from our great-grandfather's Richard Smith's walnut tree in the back of the house in Georgetown, from Aunt Sadie's visit there. That's our great Aunt Sadie. Or she would purchase Diamond brand kosher walnuts. She brought Hellman's kosher horseradish in a small glass jar and large eggs, but only boiled and used one, after checking thoroughly for any blood-spotted egg yolks, and used Diamond or Morton brand salt and showed me symbols on the labels of the cylinder-shaped cardboard boxes. The first symbol was diamond-shaped with the letter K inside, and Morton had a U with a circle around it on the side of the box. That means kosher, Mother said, taking down store-bought McCormick ground cinnamon in a small white and red tin. Our family Passover was always more about the ritual preparation than dinner afterwards.